The woman's screams stopped after the third day, not because the pain ended, because her voice gave out. Her name was Rachel Plummer. She was 19 years old. They stripped her naked, staked her to the ground under the Texas sun, and let the ants do the rest. When she begged for water, they urinated on her face. When she tried to cover herself, they broke her fingers. This was 1836. This was real. This was just the beginning. This wasn't fiction. It really happened. The Comanche Empire controlled over 240,000 square miles of North America. They weren't nomads. They were apex predators. For 2 centuries, they dominated the southern plains through a calculated system of terror that made neighboring tribes flee at the sound of their war cries. The Spanish called them Lords of the Plains. The Mexicans called them the cruelest people on earth. The Americans learned what that meant when their women started disappearing. They took captives for specific reasons. Men were usually killed immediately. Boys under 10 might be adopted, but women and girls had a different purpose entirely. The Comanche didn't take prisoners of war. They took commodities, living tools, objects that screamed. Cynthia Ann Parker was 9 years old when they came. May 19, 1836, Fort Parker, Texas. The warriors rode in under a white flag. The settlers opened the gates. 15 minutes later, 5 men were dead, castrated, their genitals stuffed in their mouths. The women were dragged behind horses. Cynthia watched her mother get gang-raped on the ground, while her father's corpse cooled beside her. Then they threw Cynthia over a horse and rode for 6 days without stopping. She was 9. She would spend the next 24 years with them. The first night always followed the same pattern. Strip the captive, let the entire band inspect her. The warriors would bid. Highest bidder got first rights. After him, anyone who wanted a turn could take it. If she resisted, they burned her feet with hot coals. If she kept resisting, they cut off her nose. Josiah Wilbarger documented over 300 cases. 87% of female captives reported gang rape within the first 48 hours. Those are just the ones who survived to report it. Sarah Ann Horn watched them kill her infant daughter. They grabbed the baby by the ankles, swung her against a tree, then tossed the body aside like garbage. Sarah was kept alive. They needed her for other things. She described her first month in captivity, raped daily, sometimes by 6 or 7 men, fed rotting meat, forced to drink horse blood when water ran low. She tried to escape twice. After the second attempt, they tied her between 2 horses and dragged her for 3 miles. The skin came off her back in sheets. She stopped trying after that. Pause for a second. Imagine being so thoroughly broken that you stop thinking about escape, that you accept your new reality, that your mind builds walls around itself just to keep functioning. That's what they engineered. Systematic destruction of identity. It wasn't random violence. It was deliberate psychological warfare. Matilda Lockhart was returned to San Antonio in 1840 as part of a prisoner exchange. The Texans didn't recognize her at first. Her nose had been burned off. Her face was a mass of scar tissue. She'd been in captivity 16 months. When asked what happened, she could barely speak. Her testimony, recorded by Mary Maverick, described how the Comanche women were often worse than the men. They would heat iron rods and press them against captives' genitals. They would force sticks into vaginas and twist until the bleeding wouldn't stop. They did this while laughing, while children watched, while teaching the next generation how to properly torture white women. The Comanche had specific words for different types of captives. Tequap meant someone owned. Nimina meant a Comanche person. You could become Nimina through adoption, but you had to earn it. Through complete submission, through forgetting your previous family, through killing your own people if ordered. Cynthia Ann Parker became Nimina. She married a war chief named Peta Nocona. She had 3 children with him. When Texas Rangers rescued her in 1860, she fought them. She tried to escape back to the Comanche multiple times. She'd been 9 when captured. She was 34 when freed. She had forgotten English, forgotten Christianity, forgotten what it meant to be white. The Comanche didn't invent sexual violence in warfare. Every military force in history has used rape as a weapon. But the Comanche, because they were so effective at raiding, and because they existed at a time when literacy was spreading, left us detailed records from the victims themselves. We have their words, their specific descriptions, their nightmares made permanent in ink. Texas executed several Comanche leaders after the Council House fight in 1840. 12 chiefs killed, 27 taken prisoner. The official reason was treaty violations. The real reason was revenge for what had happened to women like Matilda Lockhart. The executed chiefs were mutilated after death, castrated, scalped, dismembered. White men did to dead Comanche what living Comanche had done to white women. The cycle of atrocity feeding itself. Some captives developed Stockholm Syndrome before it had a name. They defended their captors, insisted they hadn't been mistreated, refused to testify against them. This made sense from a survival perspective. If you can't escape and resistance means death, you align yourself with power. You become complicit in your own captivity. You tell yourself it's not so bad that you chose this, that you love your owner. The alternative is madness. There's a photograph of Cynthia Ann Parker taken after her rescue. She looks dead behind the eyes, holding her daughter Prairie Flower. Both would be dead within a few years. Cynthia from grief and starvation. She refused to eat once taken from the Comanche. She wanted to die. She got her wish. Her daughter died of disease. The last link to her Comanche life, gone. Herman Lehman was a boy captured and adopted by the Apache, then traded to the Comanche. He became fully Comanche, fought against white settlers, killed white people. When he was finally captured and returned to his birth family, he tried to escape multiple times. He'd forgotten German, his native language. He had to be taught how to wear shoes, how to use a fork, how to be white again. In his memoir, he wrote that he missed his Comanche life. The freedom, the violence, the simplicity of it. But female captives who integrated never wrote memoirs saying they missed it. Cynthia Ann Parker couldn't write. She'd forgotten how. Bianca Balb never spoke of it. The women who survived and could speak spoke of horror, only horror. Whatever Stockholm Syndrome existed, lived in silence in the parts too painful to examine. The Texas Rangers became legends partially through their ruthless pursuit of Comanche raiders. They didn't take prisoners. When they found a Comanche camp, they killed everyone they could, including children, including captives who'd gone native. It was ethnic cleansing justified by the atrocities committed against white women. The violence created the counter-violence, which justified more violence. An eternal loop written in blood. Ranald Mackenzie's 1874 campaign ended the Comanche threat. He killed over 1,000 of their horses at Palo Duro Canyon, destroying their mobility and their entire way of life. The survivors surrendered within months, starving, broken, forced onto reservations. The military called it pacification. What it really meant was the end of a people who had been lords of the plains for 2 centuries. But the women, the captured women who'd spent years in Comanche hands, what happened to them? Most disappeared from history. No follow-up, no records of how they lived or when they died. They existed in historical accounts only as victims, as objects of horror, as proof of Comanche savagery. Their humanity, their personhood beyond their trauma, was erased a second time by the very society that claimed to rescue them. Olive Oatman's tattoo marked her forever. Children would point at her on the street. Women would whisper, "She married once late in life, to a man who never asked about her captivity." She died in 1903. Her last words, according to the attending nurse, were, "I want to go home." Where was home for Olive Oatman? Not the white settlements where she was born. Not the Mojave camps where she'd been marked. Nowhere. Home had been destroyed the day she was captured. She spent her entire life displaced. The stories don't have happy endings. They have endings where people survive, but remain broken. Where trauma echoes across decades. Where women live long lives haunted by memories they can't escape. Where the body heals but the mind never does. Pause for a second. The military records are clinical. Female captive recovered, multiple injuries, severe psychological distress, non-communicative. Behind each report was a human being who had endured months or years of systematic sexual violence, physical torture, and complete dehumanization. Some women, when rescued, killed themselves rather than return to white society. They couldn't face the shame, the questions, the knowledge that everyone would forever see them as ruined. Francisco Ruiz, a Mexican official, documented a case in 1828. A 17-year-old girl returned from Comanche captivity, pregnant. The town's priest refused to baptize the baby, called it demon seed. The girl drowned the infant in a well 3 days after birth, then threw herself in after it. Ruiz wrote that this was common, that returned captives faced such social death that actual death seemed preferable. The Comanche Wars lasted from roughly 1750 to 1875, 125 years, thousands of captives taken, most never returned. Those who did return brought back stories that newspapers wouldn't print, that ministers wouldn't discuss from pulpits, that families buried in silence. Quena Parker, son of Cynthia Ann Parker, and War Chief Peta Nocona, became the last free Comanche chief. He surrendered in 1875, became a rancher, a judge, a wealthy man. He had multiple wives. He never spoke publicly about his mother's captivity, about how she got there, about what his father's people had done to thousands of women. He didn't have to. Everyone already knew. The Comanche oral tradition doesn't emphasize these aspects of their history. Their stories focus on warfare, horsemanship, resistance against colonization. Which makes sense. Every culture curates its past. But the women, the thousands of women and girls, their stories exist in fragmented documents, traumatized testimonies, and mass graves scattered across Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Sarah Ann Horn eventually wrote a memoir, published in 1839. She described being forced to eat pieces of a white child's body. The Comanche had killed a boy during a raid, roasted him, and made captives eat the flesh as a test. Those who refused were burned. She ate it, she survived, but she wrote that something inside her died that day, something that never came back. The ransom system created its own nightmare. Families would scrape together everything they owned to buy back a daughter or wife. But the Comanche learned this was profitable, so they would capture women specifically to ransom them. And if the family couldn't pay, the captive was sold to Comancheros, to other tribes, or simply used until she died. The Comanche would sometimes send pieces of the captive to the family, a finger, an ear, a scalp, to prove they had her. To motivate faster payment, Temple Leah Houston, son of Sam Houston, prosecuted crimes on the Texas frontier. His case files include testimony from a woman who was kept in a cage for 6 months, a literal cage made of wooden poles. She was fed scraps and periodically pulled out for rape. When she was finally ransomed, her spine had curved from the cramped space. She could never stand fully upright again. The U.S. Army's official position was that female captives were better off dead than captured. Officers openly stated this. Better to kill your own women than let the Comanche take them. Some families adopted this policy. There are documented cases of fathers shooting their daughters rather than let them be taken alive. Mercy killings on the frontier. Think about that calculus. Think about what has to be true for that to make sense. Comanche warriors would sometimes keep trophies. Scalps, yes, but also more personal items. Pieces of jewelry taken from corpses, strips of tattooed skin, braids of hair. These weren't just tokens of victory. They were reminders of dominance, of power, of the ability to take, violate, and destroy at will. Josiah Gregg, a trader who traveled the Santa Fe Trail, wrote about seeing a Comanche camp where captives were kept. He described women chained to posts, naked, covered in bruises and cuts. He asked his Comanche guide why they were treated this way. The guide laughed and said, "They are nothing. Less than dogs. We do what we want." Gregg noted this without emotion in his journal. It was simply what happened, unremarkable, normal. The psychological mechanism the captives developed was dissociation, leaving your body while it's being violated, creating a mental space where the horror isn't happening to you, but to someone else. To a shell, many captives who returned described this, watching themselves from above, floating away, going somewhere else while men used their bodies. It's a survival mechanism. It's also a form of living death. But adoption was rare. Most captives weren't meant to integrate. They were meant to suffer and then be traded. The Comanche ran a sophisticated slave trade network. Captured Anglo and Mexican women were valuable currency. They could be traded to other tribes for horses, weapons, or goods, or they could be taken to Comanchero traders who sold them to Mexican ranchers who needed laborers, or kept as personal property, raped until pregnant, then killed if the baby looked too white. The mixed-race children who survived faced their own hell, neither fully Comanche nor fully white, living evidence of their mother's violation. Rachel Plummer, the woman from the beginning, kept a diary. Somehow, pieces of bark, animal blood for ink, memories etched while her captors slept. She described giving birth during captivity. Alone, in the dirt. The baby came out blue. She thought it was dead, but then it cried, and the Comanche warriors heard it. They came into her shelter, grabbed the newborn, and smashed its head against a tree while she watched. Then they raped her again while she bled from childbirth. She was 19 years old. James Parker spent 11 years trying to find his niece Cynthia. He documented every captive testimony he could find. One woman, name lost to history, told him how the Comanche would tie captives to stakes and let their horses bite chunks of flesh from their bodies. Not enough to kill, just enough to terrorize. Another described a pregnant captive who was cut open, the fetus removed, held up for everyone to see, then thrown into a fire. The mother was kept alive for 3 more days. The Mexicans had dealt with this for generations before the Americans arrived. They had archives full of testimonies. Women returned with brands on their faces, permanent ownership marks. Some had their Achilles tendons cut so they couldn't run. Others had pins driven through their jawbones, just to make eating painful. It wasn't about practicality. It was about domination, about making the body itself a prison. Olive Oatman survived captivity with the Mohave, allies of the Comanche. She was tattooed on her chin, marked as property. When she returned to white society in 1857, people couldn't look at her. The tattoo was permanent proof of what had happened. She gave lectures about her experience, but always left out the worst parts. She would start to speak, then stop, then simply say, "I cannot describe it." The audience would nod. They understood. There are some horrors that language cannot contain. Nelson Lee was a Texas Ranger who spent 3 years tracking Comanche raiding parties. His journals describe finding abandoned camps where captives had been kept, blood-stained stakes, bits of clothing, hair, teeth, and sometimes bodies. What the Comanche did to captives they no longer wanted is documented, but rarely discussed. They would stake them spread eagle, make shallow cuts across the entire body, and leave them for the sun and insects. Death took days. The screaming could be heard for miles. It was meant to be heard. It was a message. The Great Raid of 1840 brought this reality into Texas towns themselves. Hundreds of warriors rode into Victoria and Linville, killing every man they found, and taking women and children by the dozens. Witnesses described warriors raping girls as young as 10 in the middle of Main Street, while buildings burned around them. They scalped men while they were still alive. They cut off breasts and wore them as trophies. When the Texas militia finally caught up, they found trails marked by discarded captives. The old and sick, simply thrown from horses and left to die of thirst. Pause for a second. We teach history like it's a series of dates and treaties. But history is trauma. History is a woman's mind breaking as she realizes no one is coming. History is a child learning that screaming doesn't help. History is the moment you understand that your body is no longer yours. The Comanche weren't unique in their brutality. Every empire builds itself on the bodies of the conquered, but they perfected a specific kind of terror. Gendered violence as military strategy. The rape wasn't incidental. It was central. It destroyed families, traumatized communities, and ensured that settlement meant constant fear. Every white woman living on the frontier went to bed knowing what would happen if the Comanche came. And they did come. Regularly, efficiently, with zero mercy. Bianca Babb was 4 when captured. She didn't remember her real family. The Comanche raised her, used her, and eventually sold her to Comanchero traders. She was passed between men, like currency for 8 years before being ransomed. When she returned to white society at age 12, she spoke only Comanche. She had scars across her entire body. She never spoke about what happened. Not once. She lived to be 76, died in silence. We want history to be simple, good versus evil, civilization versus savagery, but it's not. It's humans destroying humans. It's systems of power built on degradation. It's suffering so profound it breaks language, and it's all real. Every word of this happened to real people with real names who felt real pain. The Comanche Empire fell because the United States was larger, more industrialized, and more ruthless in its capacity for total war, not because they were more moral, not because they didn't commit atrocities. The difference was scale and record-keeping. We know what the Comanche did because victims wrote it down. We know less about what happened to Comanche women during the wars of extermination because they couldn't write, or no one cared to record it, or the records were destroyed. History is written by survivors, and sometimes survival is worse than the alternative. The last traditional Comanche died in the 1950s. People who remembered the old ways, the warrior culture, the raids, the freedom of the plains before the reservations. They took their stories with them. But the descendants of captives also carried stories, passed down through generations. Great-great-grandmother who never spoke about those years, who flinched at certain sounds, who couldn't stand being touched, whose trauma coded itself into family DNA. Rachel Plummer's diary survived. It's in the archives. You can read her words, her description of watching her baby murdered, her account of being raped while recovering from childbirth, her matter-of-fact narration of daily brutality, and at the end her conclusion, "I survived, but the woman I was died there. She made it home, lived another year, died at 21 from injuries sustained in captivity. Her last words were, "Thank God it's over. This is what humans do to each other when power dynamics allow it." Not Comanche specifically, humans. Every empire, every conquering force, every group with the power to dominate has done versions of this. The specific details change. The underlying dynamic doesn't. Power plus opportunity equals atrocity. Every time, the Comanche were destroyed by the same forces that destroyed the women they captured. Industrialization, expansion, the relentless machinery of colonial empire. The women were just caught between two grinding mechanisms of dehumanization. Used by one side, pitied and then abandoned by the other. Objects in a larger conflict. Never fully human in anyone's eyes. We can look back now with distance. Analyze it, discuss it, turn it into content, but for the woman staked in the dirt with ants crawling into her wounds, there was no distance. There was only the eternal now of suffering. And when we forget that, when we turn horror into history lesson, we complete the process of erasure that started when she was first captured. So remember Rachel Plummer, remember Cynthia Ann Parker, remember Matilda Lockhart, and Sarah Ann Horn and Olive Oatman, and Bianca Babb and the thousands whose names we don't know. Remember that they were human, that they suffered beyond comprehension, that they survived or didn't, that their pain was real and immediate, and world-ending. And remember that this capacity, this ability to inflict such suffering, lives in all of us, not as history, as potential, waiting for the right conditions, the right excuse, the right dehumanization of the other. We are all capable of becoming Comanche warriors. We are all capable of becoming their victims. The distance between civilization and savagery is thinner than we want to believe. The scream stopped after the third day, not because the pain ended, because her voice gave out, and in the silence that followed, something worse than screaming took hold. The acceptance, the understanding that this was her life now, that help wasn't coming, that she would endure this until she died, or went mad, or both. That's the real horror, not the violence itself, but the moment you realize it will never stop. Next time, we'll discuss what the Mongols did to the women of conquered cities, what Genghis Khan's army perfected as military doctrine, what made the Comanche look merciful. By comparison, the screaming always stops eventually.